So thank you very much, Noreen, for that very nice introduction. And it's a real pleasure to have this opportunity to present some of my work on conditional cash transfer program. This is a new project with Tom Bogle here in economics here at Princeton. Okay, so let me start talking a bit about history of conditional cash transfer programs. It's really striking the extent to which these programs have become a main strategy for poverty alleviation around the developing world. So they're now conditional cash transfer programs, or CCTs, in over 60 countries around the world. They began in Latin America and Mexico, which I'm going to talk about today, and Brazil. They're all over Latin America. Almost every country has a conditional cash transfer program, and now they've also spread to developing countries in Africa and Asia. There are even a few programs now in Europe, and a couple of pilot programs of CCTs underway in the U.S., in New York, and Memphis. So why so much, attention? Why are these programs suddenly so popular? What's their main innovation? So these are programs, they're poverty alleviation programs, so they give money to the poor, but they condition, as the name suggests, they condition transfers to the poor to their investment in human capital. And so what does this mean? In exchange for receiving transfers, poor households are obligated to send their kids to school. Some countries also have a health component, so there's a part of the transfers that are linked to attending preventative health clinic visits. Okay, so if they don't comply with those conditions, they don't receive the money in that month. So what's attractive about this? And so their programs, then, in a sense, have two objectives, two big objectives within one program. So on the one hand, they give money to the poor today, so they have the objective of reducing poverty today. So families have more money today, they can buy more food, etc. It also has this interesting second objective, which is reducing poverty in the future, so breaking or helping to break kind of the intergenerational transmission of poverty. So the idea is, since you condition the benefits, kids will be more likely to go to school, they'll get more schooling, and so when they grow up, the idea is they'll be more likely to have better jobs. And it's really this kind of second objective that's what's gotten a lot of attention on this idea of kind of having two objectives within one program. Okay, so the question of the talk today is, so we're going to look at a context of a conditional cash transfer that's been around for a while. So now we have a generation of kids who basically grew up with this program, and so we want to look at the second objective. So is it true that kids that got more schooling as a result of a conditional cash transfer are more likely to get better jobs when they enter the labor market or to have higher incomes? And so that's the question of today. That might seem, we often find in studies that people with higher education have higher wages, so that might not seem surprising. But this is a context where we'll see the communities where the CCP is received are very poor. They're very agriculturally oriented. That's mostly what there is to do in these communities. It's agriculture. The schools are not very good. And so you might think that, and a lot of critics of the program have been saying this for a long time, that what might happen is, okay, sure, you get the kids in school for more time or more years, but when they grow up, they're not going to have higher income. Okay, so they're just spending more time in school, but not necessarily learning more or doing anything very productive. And actually, there's some evidence that supports a bit this worry, so that a number of short-term CCT studies of schooling impact show that it's true that kids spend more time in school, but the impacts on learning are kind of mixed. So, that's a bit strange. If you spend more time in school, you should be learning more. So that's kind of a bit of a red flag. And so there's one other paper I'll mention in the literature review. This is really one of the first papers to look at the sort of longer-term labor market effects on youth have grown up with a CCT program. Okay, so this paper then will look at income employment effects Of the oldest conditional cash transfer program, I'll say more about Progressa in a minute, began in 1997. So I'm only going to talk about effects in rural areas. The program operates also in urban areas, but that's a later phase of expansion. So I'm only going to talk about effects of rural youth in poor areas. So the treatment group, the kids I'm really going to focus on, are those who are age 11 to 12 pre-programmed in 1997. So that'll be my treatment group, so to speak. Why that age group? And this is because these youth are, when the program starts, they're right in the transition, the age to transition between primary and secondary school. And what short-term effects have shown of the program, that's really where you get a big education effect on those groups of kids. The program sort of falls from the sky, gives them a scholarship for going to school right at the right time, and so there's a big effect. If you get offered that same scholarship several years later, it's really too late. You've already dropped out and you're not going to go back to school to be with a bunch of 12-year-olds. Right, so that'll be the group of interest, and so I'm going to follow them in a sense. And so by the long-term effects, I'm going to look at when these same kids were 11 to 12, when the program started, they'll be 24 to 25 in 2010, which is when I'll last look at them. And so at that point, I can see what's happened to their outcomes in the labor market, and I'll also show that they do in fact have achieved more schooling. The data is the 10% sample of the Mexican census from 1990, 2000, and 2010. So I linked this information to administrative beneficiary information, which tells me how many beneficiaries there are of Progressa at the municipality level. And so I'll use the 1990 to look at pre-program trends, that's before the program begins. I'll use the 2000 to look at short-term effects after 3 years of the program, and I'll use 2010 to look at the longer-term effects. Okay, the identification, what's the strategy? It's a simple difference in difference, so I'll be comparing. So the two variations are in municipalities. So basically in 2010, all the rural municipalities have a CCT, and if you visit any rural community, almost surely they'll have half of the households at least will have the program. So the variation here is going to come from municipalities that get the program earlier versus municipalities that get the program later. And the other difference, the other difference is from youth who are right at this age, the right age to receive the benefit. So these are youth that are 11 to 12, and so I'm going to compare them to youth that are just a little bit older, so 14 and 15, when it's really the offer of this grant is just too late for it to benefit much, for them to benefit much from school. So yeah.
But they're possibly, their families might be benefiting from the transfer from younger siblings though, right?
That's correct. That's correct. So, it's a program that does a lot of things. In a sense, it gives, gives money, it conditions that money, the mom controls the money. So they're different. I'm going to assume that those effects are similar by age.
Okay. But that'll be my earlier wonder was the effects on labor market outcomes, just of the health and well-being of the family by having more money, but the older kids should difference that, or some might difference that out, some might not, or how are you distinguishing between the education per se effects and the effects of the transfer?
Yeah, I'm not really. So in a sense, it's receiving a program early versus highlighting the effect on education. But you're right, there may be other effects.
But if you're in rural Mexico, it's not going to be that great because the opportunities for going to school, they're just not that big in the rural area. Right? For the older kids, to go to secundaria, because many times you only have the primaria and the secundaria requires transportation, right, etc. So the spillover effect of examination effect on the older kids, it could be through having more to eat, but not necessarily going to school.
Right. So, yeah, that's right. So, but the point that there could be labor market effects, and I'll assume those are similar by age. Okay, so I'll use the 1990, which is pre-programmed to test the specification, and actually you can also, and this gets a bit at the point, you can also use older individuals as a type of control group in 2010, because again, they shouldn't have effects on education. Actually, we looked at the labor trends, and so that's important. Okay. Okay, so I'll just preview the results. So we find large employment and income effects for men. So an overall increase, what's the education increase? 0.7 grades of schooling, so that's about a 10% increase for men. The increase in labor force participation is about 4%. It's a pretty large increase in labor income, 35%. We see shifts away from agricultural work towards non-agricultural options. For women, in fact, the schooling increases are even larger, but we don't see significant effects on employment or income for women. Okay, so let me talk a little about, give a little more details of what the program does. So Progressive gives monetary transfers to poor families, conditional and human capital investment. So how does that work operationally? So transfers are given monthly. They're linked to, so kids need to be enrolled, and they need to attend 85% of the time, otherwise the family won't receive the transfer in that month. There's also a transfer that's conditioned to regular preventative health clinic visits. All of the money is given directly to the mom of the household. And so this is a program that's huge in Mexico, 6 million households, but it's mostly a rural program. As I said, that's where I'm going to focus attention today. How much are the benefits? On average, about $50 a month, and this is, it's a big increase in the income of these families, on the order of about 30%. The program is means tested, so all families in selected communities are interviewed. So they're applying the socioeconomic survey. The eligibility is based on the poverty index, which reflects income and assets. There have been evaluations of that. It's a very well-targeted program. It's really pretty good at getting the poorest of the poor into this program. 97% of those offered accept. So after when households are determined to be eligible, they're offered the program. 97% accept. That's nice also for this evaluation, because we don't have really the issue of people self-selecting into program receipt. Okay, so here's the schedule of the grants. They're linked to these education grants, and so this is U.S. amount in U.S. dollars, and so there's two features that you can see from these grants. One, they go up with with the grade, so this just reflects higher opportunity costs of kids going to school as they get older. Another aspect is that the grants are slightly higher starting in secondary, not in primary, starting in secondary and high school. The grants are slightly higher for girls than for boys. Now, why is this? So at the beginning of the program, this design feature, where's this design feature come from? At the beginning, it's observed in education trends that girls tended to drop out at a higher rate than boys after primary school. So this was designed to compensate that, although it actually turns out that it's true that girls drop out earlier after primary school, but boys tend to fail more grades, so they take longer to complete the same amount of schooling. So in the net, on total years of schooling, it's not clear that this was such a great idea or justified based on education completion. All right. Okay, so what would we expect? Yeah.
Sorry, I just wanted to ask, how much is the monitoring? So do people actually get the money taken away from them?
Yeah, so the teachers are the ones that report whether students are in school, and that's forwarded to the Minister of Development state offices.
And do you have an idea of how many people actually comply?
So that's a good question. So I have staff and who leads the program, but that's a household variable. There are a lot of kids who could potentially are eligible to receive that don't receive. Some of those maybe because they didn't comply, and some are just don't want to enroll in school. But yeah, I don't know. So that's a good question. All right. So what do we expect? So we expect, I'm going to differ between what we expect in the short run versus the long run. So in the short run, so these are, this is subsidizing schools, giving money to go to school. So we expect to see schooling go up in the short run and work go down. So exactly what the idea of the program is parents should, stop having their kids work and have them spend more time in school. And so that's what we expect in the short run, a shift away towards from work towards school. In the longer run, so what's going to happen is kids accumulate more schooling. So eventually, when they finish schooling, they should have a higher education than what they would have. This will make them more attractive in the labor market. And so what we expect is that would increase work eventually and their wages. We also might expect to see the shifting from agricultural work to non-agricultural work as returns to schooling tend to be higher in non-agricultural jobs.
Did you look at fertility? You didn't?
Yeah, we did.
Because I was just wondering about the girls' so-called
That's
value
right,
effect,
yeah.
that it could lead to higher child quality.
That's correct, yeah. So we do actually see a reduction. So they're in their mid-20s, so it's not final, for sure, but completed, but yeah. So. Okay, so there's a very large literature on effects of conditional cash transfers. I'm just going to say, just talk briefly about the effects on education. And I have just my publicity forthcoming paper that summarizes all the effects in other areas. So so Mexico's also had a lot of influence on other countries carrying out or starting CCTs because you had this kind of famous early experimental evaluation where 506 communities were randomly assigned between treated and control groups. And so there are many studies of short-term effects. They use this experimental evaluation. The experiment didn't last very long. We always want the experiments to last as long as they can, but they don't usually last that long. The control group started to receive benefits after a year and a half. So what did these short-term studies find? They found basically positive effects on schooling indicators, on enrollment, reducing dropout, increasing years of completed schooling, and importantly for our study, the largest schooling effects are on the transition from primary to secondary. So exactly this is what we'll take advantage of in the paper. Okay, so just to give an idea of this is from the first year of the program, and so this is from the experimental data for the treatment and control, and so this shows the proportion of kids enrolled by age right before the program started, and so you can see you can't distinguish even the control and treatment, so that they're identical. And so this is 6 months post program, and so what you see is you can see for girls this gap between treatment and control, and so there's immediately distinction where enrollment for girls right at this this age of entering secondary school goes up, and it's sort of smaller at age 16 and above, and you can see this also for the boys over there. And so this initial difference, in fact, continues to grow over time. And that's what we'll use here. Okay, so there's a lot of other studies of now since there's so many, now there are also many other studies. These are a couple of review pieces that summarize schooling effects of CCTs in other countries. Here are a few that cite this mixed evidence on learning that I mentioned earlier. This paper is really the closest to ours on Nicaragua, and this was a pilot that did something a little unusual, but there was a treatment group that received a CCT for 3 years, then stopped. Then the control group received the CCT 3 years, then it stopped. Then 10 years later, they compared the two groups, and they found some labor market effects. So this is really kind of the closest to ours in terms of objectives. Okay, so a little more background. So the program operates in 95,000 rural communities. These are mostly located in what are called high poverty municipalities. Actually, there's an official definition in Mexico for poverty in a municipality, and it ranges called the margination index. When you say the marginación, and this ranks them from high poverty all the way down, so from very high poverty all the way down to very low poverty. And so the program started in municipalities that were very high or high poverty rates, and that's where I'll focus the impact results. Okay, and as I was saying, by 2010, they're all treated. Okay, so this just shows just aggregate, increase in the proportion of beneficiary households over time. Okay, so again, yeah, just to summarize, so the timeline of the program, so 1990 I'll use to show that the identification is okay. 1997 when the program begins, so my treatment group, my age treatment group are kids 11 to 12, pre-program. I'll compare them to kids that are 15 to 16 who are just a little bit too old to benefit really from the education grants. I'll look at short-term effects in 2000. And then 2010, longer term effects. And then my treatment group, the kids will be adults, 24 to 25, and I'll compare them to 28 to 29-year-olds. Okay, I'm gonna
How do you
skip this.
handle internal migration?
Yeah, I'll get to that. Okay. So, all right, so here's the specification then, the difference in difference. So the main coefficient of interest is C, which is the program impact, and so this is the interaction between P. So P measures whether your municipality entered the program early or late, and how do I measure that? By the proportion of households that receive the program in the first 2 years of the program. Okay, so that'll be my measure of early versus late, and that's interacted with the age of the youth. Okay? So this is the program impact. We also have municipal effects, and we also cluster at the state level. Okay, migration. So I have 2 things to say. You have a question?
Yes, just on the rollout, so the first difference is it wasn't randomized based on municipality. The
Yeah.
rollout was based on from higher to lower poverty.
That's correct. Right, so it's not in any way random, and so, but that's why the different ages come in, right, exactly. Okay, so let me say there's 2 ways that migration is important in the analysis. One, what I want is I want to know where people lived pre-program. Okay, so in fact, the only reason that I can use the census is because there is in fact some information which allows me to approximate where they lived pre-program. So in particular, the census asks about where you lived at the municipal level 5 years before, and it also asks about your state of birth. Okay, so I'm going to use that information. I could say more in detail, but if there are questions about that, I'll use that to construct their pre-program residents to link to whether they're in a municipality that received the program early or not. Okay, so that's one way, one aspect that migration is important here. The second aspect is who's in my sample. And in fact, the census has some information about who from the household migrates to the U.S. during the past 5 years, but they don't have any information on outcomes. Okay, so my estimates of the impacts of the program only include people who are in Mexico. So if you left for the U.S., so if you were a kid who in 1997 you got the program for a couple of years and you migrated to the U.S. and you did come back, you are not in my sample in 2010. I can't say anything about what the program impacts are for that. I do have all of the national migrants, right? Because the census is representative of, it's the census of everybody who's within Mexico. And so if you migrated within Mexico, you're in my sample. If you migrated out and did not return, then you're not in my sample. How many, this is clearly it's an age group that has a lot of migration. How many people am I missing? In the census in 2010, what I can see from the census is 4.5% of men in my sample migrated within the past 5 years, 0.8% of women. So that gives some idea of how many I'm missing. Okay, so just a map of Mexico. This is just so this is the map by the Índice Marginación, by the municipality poverty rate. So this goes from very high poverty, all the way to low poverty. And so my sample is from those in high, very high, or high poverty rates. And you can see that's there's basically all over the country except for Baja California Norte. So, but it's mainly a sample that's more prevalent in the center and southern states. Okay, so here it's pretty, it's such a diverse population, it's pretty hard to generalize because picture of typical family, lots of kids, very poor housing quality. Okay, so let me start showing some results. Okay, so this gives a picture of what these young adults look like before the program starts. So this is 1990. So these are individuals in their their mid-20s living in high poverty municipalities. And so you can see overall schooling is very low. So only about 5 years, less than primary for men, for women. Labor force participation for men is very high. For women, it's really quite low. Yes.
Is that limited to formal employment?
So, there's a couple of questions. So it's, they also ask not just whether you're working last week, but, did you sell things? So it tries to get at some informal employment. It's not very, certainly does not have, and this is a deficiency for sure, the analysis doesn't have domestic work, it doesn't have unpaid agriculture work, it doesn't have a lot of information on agriculture work. Okay, so so I can't give a complete picture of what, what people are doing for work. So that's correct. Okay, so, and what else do I want to say? So it's also a population that has a large proportion of indigenous, so about 32%. This is measured by reporting, speaking, and indigenous language. Okay, so the basic idea is a poor population with not very high levels of education. All right. Okay, so here's some of the tests of the identification. And so what is this? These are for each indicator, I'm reporting the difference in difference coefficient. So this is 1990. So this is a test of specification because we don't expect to see effects. So if I see program effects, then there's something wrong with the specification. So there, overall, there's 18 regressions here, and there's significant differences in 2 of them. So that's pretty good. That's about what you expect, about 10% by chance. Being significant. So for women, none of these are significant. There aren't significant differences. For men, there's 1 on earned income, and in fact, we'll see a bit of a strange result. This may reflect that later on. But overall, this is this is pretty supportive of the identification strategy. Okay, this is using 2010. To look at different age groups, so the effect on education. So, the story that I've been telling is basically that kids who are too old to get the program, you shouldn't see a program effect on schooling. And that's, in this graph, which just says whether you have some secondary school, exactly what you see is that the proportion of households in the program doesn't, it's sort of constant, and you see this jump up right at the age groups where the hypothesis is that it should jump out. So this is also supportive. Okay, all right, great. So now let me talk about the impacts. So the way I will talk about short-term and long-term impacts first for education, and then for labor market effects for males and females. Okay, so these are the 3-year effects starting in, in 2000. And so here I have grades of schooling, and then this is more than primary, more than secondary, more than high school. And so what we see actually, the short-term effects, will be different for women, but for men we don't see, this coefficient is kind of the right sign and about the right, size. It's not statistically significant, and so why, so it seems to be, by 2010 we see large significant effects of schooling of 0.65. So why don't we see these short-term effects initially? And this, I think, goes back to what I said earlier, that it takes longer for boys to accumulate additional schooling than girls because of these high failure rates. And we can do more on that by looking at enrollment and other education effects. Okay. All right, so what happens by 2010? We have an increase in completed schooling. I always call it grades because it's completed grades. So this abstracts a bit from whether you you failed or repeated a grade, but so you have, as a result of the program, 0.65 more years of schooling than you would have had without. Here we can see that increase in schooling, where does that come from? That's really concentrated in, so this shows the probability of having more than primary school, so that's 7% increase. The effect is really concentrated on secondary school. So this is not a program that gets kids, into college or even high school. It's, the kids get some more secondary school, and that's about it. All right. Okay, so what happens for girls? And so for girls, we see the education effects accumulate earlier on. So by 2000, so the effect on grades of schooling completed is about 0.9. Again, that's largely concentrated in secondary school. So this increase in schooling that kids are attaining is through additional years in secondary school. So what happens in 2010? Not much more of an increase. So the overall increase, by this time the girls are women in their mid-20s, and so they have an overall increase of about 1 grade of schooling. And again, concentrated on increase in secondary. So this represents a 12.6 increase in the probability of having more than primary schooling. Okay, so we've established that there's a significant increase in completed schooling. What happens in the labor market? And so in 2000, let's look what happens in the short run. So in the short run, we see a reduction for males in the probability of working, a reduction in hours worked. This is exactly what we should see. So this is exactly the time that kids should be spending more time in school and less time working in the short run, right after they start receiving the program. In fact, and we also see, so this is the proportion agriculture, this is unconditional. So what that tells us is most of this reduction in working is kids reducing agricultural type employment. Okay? There's this barely significant coefficient on labor income, which actually we saw in the 1990 pre-program trend. So I'm not going to pay too much attention to that right now, although that's something that we're still looking at. Okay, so what happens in 2010? So now when the males are in their mid-20s, so now before we saw a reduction in working, now we see an increase. This is where they've achieved about 0.7 grades of schooling, an increase in the probability of participating. The means, by the way, are here. Okay, so this is an increase of 4 percentage points in the probability of working. This is up from a base of 83%. We see an increase as well in hours, as hours worked. This is weekly. Labor income, so this is an increase, this is in pesos of about 700 pesos. This is monthly compared to a mean of 1,800. So that's a very large increase, about 35%. And as we were seeing before, we see a reduction in participation in agriculture work. So shifting towards non-agricultural jobs. Okay, we did look kind of initially at, it's also an area where we're still looking at marriage. Actually, the census doesn't have children, doesn't ask about children born for men, but anyway, okay. Yes.
So I actually have a question on the previous slide.
Sure.
So it looks like that when you get to secondary school, you should also see when it comes to the amount of grants received by the family. So it looks like not many families are receiving sort of this conditional transfer to keep kids in secondary and high school, right? Because you don't see. Because I was wondering if this is only a compliance issue, or is it, or you can see it actually the number of grants for keeping kids in high school.
Right. Now, so here, this is just the coefficient on sort of the whether you're in a municipality that gets the program earlier versus your age. So it's comparing younger youth who were offered the grants as they were entering secondary, so younger youth to older youth. think I finished talking about those. All right, so let's, so what happens to the females? So it's actually the females, they have an even larger increase in completed education. So on the order of about an additional year. So what happens in the short run? So here in the short run, we don't see a lot of reduction in work of females in the short run. On the other hand, the labor force participation rates of girls were only 18% in 2000, so it's very sort of low labor force. This partly reflects the type of work that's measured in the census. You do see this. This is sort of marriage at at these young ages. In the short run, so this just didn't mean not necessarily they won't get married in the long run, but a postponing of marriage and it's kind of this negative. It'd be nice if this program reduced adolescent childbearing, which is a big problem in Mexico. But anyway, this is not statistically significant. What happens in 2010, where women are in their mid-20s, they've achieved an additional rate of schooling compared to what they would have achieved without the program. And the answer is not a lot in the labor market. So no effect on the probability of working. And this is, pretty striking given how low, the labor force participation rate, even for this type of work, is. It's very low in these communities, and the program doesn't increase it. So no effects on labor income or hours worked. So really this, so these don't show changes. It's as if the women didn't receive this additional year of schooling or didn't participate in the program. So again, we have this initial analysis looking at marriage and children born. This is interesting reduction in number of children born. Again, this is fertility in their mid-20s, and so they haven't by any chance completed fertility. This would be a very large effect if it were completed, but it probably represents mostly postponing having children. We have to wait till later to see. But anyway, that's kind of demographic and family effects I think will be very interesting as well.
Susan, are those cohorts compared at the same age though with the reduction? Do you think
So it's comparing young to old in.
But it's not comparing children ever born by age 24 versus 28.
It is carrying out that difference, but it's differencing between municipalities that get the program earlier
So
versus
it's
that
age
get it later.
differences difference
Yeah.
out. Okay, yeah.
Sort of, but we should properly use the proportional number.
Yeah,
Yeah, but
Because
it's,
that's who number of people is different, right? So
Right.
that's sort of on the list.
it's different
yeah,
curve of child death, yeah.
right, yeah. So yeah, it's a bit tantalizing, but it's pretty preliminary. Okay, all right. So I'm going to summarize. Then, this work is looked at rural areas on the impacts where Progressive has been operating the longest time in Mexico, and so we're seeing improvements in completed schooling, which are now showing some significant labor market effects for men. So for men, the effects are pretty large. So not just in schooling, but in terms of increasing labor force participation for a group that already worked a lot, measured by the way that work is measured. In the census, labor market earnings are 35% higher. So this reflects both increases in work and higher earnings per hour, and also more hours worked. And you see, and additionally, a shift towards non-agricultural work. And in fact, we have a lot more. The census is pretty good about measuring occupation and sector, and so we can do kind of a lot more on what type of jobs, what exactly are they doing, and that's which we'll look at later. For women, it's more of a mixed story. So the impacts on education are even higher for women than for men. Yet only a small proportion of women work in the market, and Progressive doesn't seem to affect this proportion in spite of the pretty large education effects. So these effects of increasing schooling by a year, compared to what they would have had without the, that's an increase of about 15%. Now that's a big jump in completed schooling. We're not seeing, at least up till now, evidence that this has an effect in the labor market. And I'll just close with a caveat that, of course, the census only does not provide data on domestic work or on unpaid agricultural type work, basically on overall agricultural unpaid jobs, such as taking care of animals, which women tend to do more. So thank you.